MSW Media.
So yeah, now it's clean up on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be clean up on aisle 45.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 217 of Clean Up on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. I'm Allison Gill.
Hey, AG. I'm Harry Dunn. We have a lot to cover today, including an update on the Eric Adams case, of course, and what happens if US Marshals under Pam Bondi refuse to carry out contempt of court orders against the Trump administration.
Yeah, plus we're going to be talking about the Republican continuing resolution that 10 Democrats helped pass in the Senate, hanging their buddies in the House out to dry, and the first judge to reject Trump's January 6th pardons covering unrelated crimes. It's kind of a good news story, but bittersweet because we still have the pardons for the January 6th crimes. But first, Elon Musk, and this is near and dear to your heart here because you've been going back and forth to Wisconsin for this Wisconsin Supreme Court race for a minute and speaking in town halls and on panels about this race. And Elon Musk is now spending millions of dollars in this Wisconsin Supreme Court race. And Ari Berman has written a piece for Mother Jones. And in it, he says, so many Democrats feel this deep fear combined with an incandescent fury at what's happening to the country. And they want an outlet that allows them to fight back. This Supreme Court race gives people who believe in democracy a chance to defeat the oligarchs who are trying to end democracy for good. And we have a special guest today. Joining us to discuss the April 1st election is the national voting rights correspondent from Mother Jones who wrote that piece, Ari Berman. Ari, welcome.
Hey, Allison. Hey, Harry. Great to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Ari.
Yeah, it's really good to see you. Ari and I were talking before we hit the record button. I don't think we've spoken since the good old Mueller days, but the salad days when things were a little easier. So it's been a minute.
Yeah, there's been a lot going on since then.
Times are a lot different now, you know?
Yeah, it's not as fun. There's no more fantasy indictment league. So it's a little different these days. But Ari, the underpinning theme in your article here is that we're about to find out what carries more weight, Elon's money or the fury that Musk is provoking among voters, I think as Ben Wickler said. And we've all seen the town hall clips in multiple Republican districts, and people are really upset with what Musk is doing, even in these ruby red districts. What did you find out during, when you were researching this article about how mad people really are?
Well, first off, just to set up the context, Elon Musk, through two super PACs, has donated $12 million to the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, backing the conservative candidate Brad Schimmel. As far as we can tell, that is a record for a state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. This is not a presidential election. $12 million is a lot of money for a Wisconsin Supreme Court race or for any state Supreme Court race. What's at stake is the ideological majority of the court. It had been a 4-3 conservative court, but progressives flipped that majority in April 2023. They subsequently struck down the gerrymandered lines that had given Republicans these huge lopsided majorities in the legislature for so many years. But there's a lot of other big issues before the court: the fate of Wisconsin's 1849 abortion ban, the law that was passed by Governor Scott Walker restricting collective bargaining rights for unions, potentially the legality of the state's congressional maps. And remember, this was the same state Supreme Court that came within one vote of overturning the 2020 election. So it's not a stretch to say that this court can also decide election outcomes. And Musk has gotten involved in a huge way and basically is trying to buy the Wisconsin Supreme Court in the same way that he so effectively bought the federal government for Trump and is now taking a chainsaw to it.
Yeah, I've been out to Wisconsin, I think 3 times since this beginning of the year. And I actually plan on coming out there next week. As you know, the election's coming up on April the 1st. And aside from this being the first, major opportunity for citizens to let their voice be heard since November the 5th, outside of that, why are the stakes so high for the Wisconsin Supreme Court?
Well, that's a really good question, Harry. I think, like I said, the stakes would have been high if Musk hadn't gotten involved, because this court deals with so many hot button issues, from redistricting to voting laws to abortion to labor rights and so on and so forth. But Musk just dramatically raised the stakes because now that he's spending so much money there, this is really the first chance for Democrats to do something about it. They don't have any power in Washington. So yes, they can vote against budgets, they can do stuff like that, but they don't have any way right now to defeat Trump or Musk at the ballot box. And this is the first opportunity for them to do so. And so what Republicans are hoping is that Musk's money helps them basically buy this seat, that it negatively defines the progressive candidate, Susan Crawford, who's a judge in Madison-Dane County. They're hoping that there's this huge void, people don't know who she is, and they can define her through this onslaught of TV ads. The Democrats, on the other hand, are hoping that Musk's money motivates Democrats to turn out, because this is going to be a low turnout election, relatively low turnout, meaning that if 60% of presidential voters turn out, whichever side gets their side out, they are more likely to win.
Do you still think it's going to be low, even with considering everything that's happened so far?
Well, I think it's going to be high for a state Supreme Court race. And the last election in April 2023 was very high for a state Supreme Court race, but it's not going to be presidential election turnout.
Gotcha.
And so Democrats are asking themselves the question, like, what should we do? What can we do right now? And this is a tangible thing they can actually do, right? I mean, they can't take back the House. They can't take back the Senate. They can't win the White House right now, but they can defeat Elon Musk in Wisconsin. And I think that would both be a big deal for Wisconsin, but I think it would have national ripple effects as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder too, like, if it's like a lot of times Democrats are like, yeah, run the MAGA guy because we'll have an easier time defeating them in some of these more purple areas. But, you know, for Elon Musk to attach himself so directly and so openly and publicly to this race is probably their biggest detriment going in. And so you recently spoke to Ben Wickler, who was the chair of Wisconsin Dems, ran to be DNC chair. Now he's didn't get that position, back to running the Wisconsin Democrats. And he told you that this election is a referendum on Muskism. But what are the Dems doing on the ground with Ben Wickler to overcome this right-wing money machine? I imagine they're knocking doors. They're trying to get the message out to get the vote out, right?
Yeah, they are doing a lot of grassroots mobilization, door knocking, town halls, things of that nature. They've launched this People versus Musk campaign. And what they're telling me is that, yes, they have a financial disadvantage, which they did not have in the last election. There has been more money on the right than the left in terms of large donations, but they say they have twice as many volunteers as they had in April 2023 when they won the state Supreme Court race by 11 points. So this issue is definitely resonating locally. I think people in Wisconsin who are plugged in knew the stakes of this state Supreme Court race to begin with. But those people that don't follow politics in and out, they hear the words Elon Musk and they understand what's going on. They see what he's doing in Washington. They understand how unpopular it is. And they see him trying to do the same thing in Wisconsin. And it should mention that it's not just about ideology. Tesla has sued the state of Wisconsin over a law that bans car manufacturers from having dealerships there. So there are no Tesla dealerships in Wisconsin. Musk clearly wants to change that. And he got involved tweeting about the Wisconsin Supreme Court race right after Tesla filed that lawsuit. So as Ben Wickler told me, it's a democracy crisis layered on top of plain old corruption, which I think sort of encapsulates the entire Trump era, unfortunately.
Yeah, because we were going to ask about the self-dealing here that Elon Musk is participating in because, by supporting the conservative bench.
Yeah, I mean, it's not inconceivable this Tesla lawsuit could eventually reach the Wisconsin Supreme Court. It's not the kind of thing the court usually decides, but certainly it could reach that level. It's also just worth noting that, I mean, these state Supreme Courts, they have a lot of power with redistricting, with voting laws, with even hearing challenges to the outcome of elections. So they're doing this based on self-interest, but they're also looking at 2026, 2028, and realizing that they need that conservative majority back so they can get a court that's friendlier to their own interests. And it's also worth noting that, and Harry, I know that you'll take a particular interest in this, the conservative candidate, Brad Schimmel, who's a former state attorney general, he's run an unusually MAGA race. Usually these candidates for state Supreme Court, they try to be sort of low profile because they're judges at the end of the day. He has basically said that he would like Trump's endorsement. He said that the January 6th insurrectionists didn't receive fair trials, which I thought was really kind of eye-opening. He has urged Trump to campaign for him. He has welcomed dark money into the race. So that is very unusual for someone who wants to be a judge in the highest court to do that. It's one thing to have an opinion on something like abortion. I think that's something that judges do. But to be so outwardly pro-insurrection, that is, I think, a new level of disturbing for a candidate for this kind of office.
Sure. And you know what? That's what got me involved in the race from the start. You know, I couldn't have told you Bradley Schimmel's policies on, you know, this or that, but I knew where he stood about January 6th. I knew what he said about support of the insurrectionists and the pardons that day. And that's what actually brought me out there just to start with. And then obviously, as I'm learning about the race, learning about Crawford and Schimmel, just how they just are totally different people. And like you said, you're supposed to be, you know, nonpartisan, you know, that they don't run as Democrats or independents. But Elon Musk, you know, is making it hard for Bradley Schimmel to not run a MAGA race and has made this election difficult for him. What you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think Musk is backing him because this guy was already predisposed to be MAGA, but now he's kind of taking it to the nth degree. And you know, he said he wants to be part of a support network for Trump. So again, this is not like a conservative candidate who happens to be pro-Trump running for the court. This is someone who's running for the court precisely because of his allegiance to Donald Trump. I just saw a photo of him with a 50-foot blow-up doll of Trump at what was called a mega MAGA rally. He apparently dressed as Trump for Halloween. So this is very strange to me. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine if the liberal candidate was this obsessed with Kamala Harris? I mean, it would be a major thing. I mean, these people are supposed to rule impartially, and you get it. Generally speaking, the progressives rule for liberal causes and the conservatives rule for conservative causes, but that's not always the case. And certainly you don't want all it to be predetermined. And it's one thing for you to be, I think, a liberal or conservative. I think it's another thing for you to be so partisan in your orientation. And that is one of the things that we've seen happen to the US Supreme Court in terms of the partisanship. It's not that they're conservatives anymore. It's that they are now partisan Republicans in terms of how they rule, particularly in things like the immunity case. And the worry here, that's happened to the states as well. And that we don't know. I mean, if you have this outwardly MAGA court, the ramifications could be huge. And the thing is, if they win this race, if the right wins this race and Musk's money does end up working, they're going to be emboldened to go state by state by state. And it's a lot cheaper to flip these state Supreme Courts than it is to try to buy the presidency. So I think we will see a huge amount of spending in the future. If they lose, Musk might say, listen, didn't work out in Wisconsin. I'm redirecting my efforts elsewhere. I mean, I think he's still going to spend money regardless. But just the fact that he could be defeated, to me, would have a major national ramifications about what he does next, and also maybe embolden Democrats to think like we should actually fight this guy as opposed to try to reach some kind of agreement with him.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you bring up a really good point with people like Schimmel. You know, Trump has learned his lesson, you know, Susan Collins style, in that, you know, with appointments like Amy Coney Barrett, who has ruled against him a few times, ruled against the fourth holding in the immunity case, for example, about the evidence, the official acts evidence. She was like, no, that's crazy. And a couple times here, you know, joining with Roberts and the liberals on the Supreme Court in a couple of decisions against the Trump administration. And so he's feeling probably a little hung out to dry by stuff like that, or like Dabney Friedman, who we're going to talk about this later, Harry, who just said, no, your January 6th pardons do not cover these additional crimes. And so I think now he's like, that's it. It's nothing but all MAGA all the way for every single judge that I put on the bench right now, because if I put somebody who can read, you know, on a court, then they could, you know, rule against me and my best interests. Talk a little bit before we let you go about, you know, coming with the territory of having Elon Musk involved in your campaign. There is going to be disinformation, and there's quite a bit going on in this race. Talk about that. You cover that in your article.
There's a lot of disinformation in the race. First off, Musk has funded another group secretly that is basically saying that Crawford supports all these positions that she doesn't actually support. That is one level of disinformation. There have been flyers out there giving people the wrong information about elections. There's been a lot of stuff. They've basically been hammering Crawford as soft on crime, which is a long-standing conservative attack. I still, Harry, this still mystifies me that in the wake of January 6th, they can do this. But nonetheless, they keep doing it. But basically, they're calling her catch and release Crawford. And they're sort of betting that voters are going to vote on the typical issues, which is kind of law and order crime, and that's where she is vulnerable. So that's a lot of disinformation to have to try to combat. And I think that basically there is some kind of counterattacks on Schimmel for his own criminal justice record. But I think it's also about that this is one issue in the race, but try to talk about the bigger picture here in terms of what Schimmel would do and the type of judge he would be. And basically, Crawford is basically saying, I'm a judge. Like, I issue lots of rulings, judges issue lots of rulings, and that Schimmel is a partisan and that he's a far-right partisan. And we don't want a far-right partisan in a court that is basically in a 50-50 state.
Yeah, that kind of gives me a little hope. You know, that's the thing that I've been seeing out there when I have been out there. In Madison, I spoke with two sheriffs and one chief of police that came down from Eau Claire, that came down and stood with me in Madison. And they are just literally disgusted by the partisanship shown by Bradley Schimmel, instead of just being fair. And like Bradley Schimmel's the type of person that's made his mind up before he's heard the case, like we had talked about earlier. And it's really disgusting that this is the stance that he's taken. And like I said, that's one of the reasons I keep showing up, because listen, I'll always push back against, January 6th deniers and conspiracy theorists like that, sympathizers, especially when that person is seeking from the citizens of Wisconsin to represent them in the highest court in the state. I think it's important that you have nonpartisan people there, especially non-sympathizers of criminals already going in. So,
yeah. Well, hey, Ari, we really appreciate your time. Want to make sure that everybody reads this article. It's in Mother Jones. So everybody check that out, and you can follow Ari Berman on all the socials. This election early in-person voting runs from March 18th to March 30th. That's yesterday. As you're listening to this on Wednesday the 19th. And election day is April 1st. So,
hey, AG, Ari, can I grab you for one more question? I got a question. Well, it's a two-part question. Well, what are the polls showing already? Is the early polling indicating anything? And also, do you believe that this could be a referendum one way or the other on the liberal versus conservatives? I know you talked about it earlier with Elon saying, hey, we might be out of here. Let's not spend here anymore. But is it truly a referendum? I mean, as Wisconsin goes, a lot of the U.S. goes, generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, the polling, it's hard to poll this kind of race. I mean, Marquette Law School, which is the premier pollster there, they didn't even do a head-to-head poll because 58% of the public didn't even know enough about Susan Crawford to give an opinion. So it's sort of like, this is why the organizing, the ads, the money, it all really matters. I mean, in presidential elections, you're talking about a very small percentage of people that are undecided. In this kind of race, there's a huge number of people that are undecided because they don't even know that the race is going on. I mean, it's weird to have an election in April 1st, 2025. That's not a normal election day. A lot of people are still getting over November. So I don't know. What I've heard internally is that Crawford might be up a few points, but it could very well be tied. I don't think anyone can tell you with any certainty who's ahead or who's behind now. And I do think it's a referendum. It's a referendum because so much money has come in the race from Musk, because Wisconsin is such an important swing state, because it flipped from blue in 2020 to red in 2024, that if the progressive candidate wins and survives Musk's onslaught and carries a pivotal race that a lot of resources have gone on, people are going to look at Wisconsin differently. They're going to look at the political situation differently, and they're going to say Trump and Musk are not invulnerable. And the things that they're doing are starting to have a backlash even in races like the state Supreme Court that most people tend to overlook. So that's why I think this race has major national significance beyond Wisconsin. And you don't want to overinterpret any one race, but I do think the results are going to tell us something about both the possibility of creeping oligarchy and the enduring popularity or unpopularity of MAGA, but also if there's a successful playbook to resist this kind of thing going forward.
Yep. We've got a Musk candidate and we've got like a Protasewicz on the other side. So we have to vote accordingly. If we can beat the money, that's going to be huge. And it's going to create a lot of momentum going into a couple of these other elections that are coming up in this year. Thank you so much, National Voting Rights Correspondent for Mother Jones, Ari Berman. We really appreciate your time today.
Great to see you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ari.
All right, everybody, we have more to get to, but we have to take a quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
All right, y'all, welcome back. I want to take a second to thank our new patrons. Thank you so much. You are the fire to this, and you keep us going. So thank you so much. This week, you make it possible. Kathy Beatty, Autumn Taria, MF. I like that. And Sin, spelled CYN. All right. As of this recording, Judge Dale Ho has not ruled on whether to dismiss the charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. A little background. When he was the acting deputy attorney general, Emil Bove, reached out to acting U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, Danielle Sassoon, and told her that she had to dismiss the bribery and fraud charges against Eric Adams because he made a deal with the Department of Justice and the Trump administration. They had a meeting, and Emil Bove collected all the notes the lawyers took. And he wrote a memo saying that in exchange for dismissing the charges, Eric Adams would help Trump execute his immigration policy in New York. Quid pro quo.
Yeah, quite. Like, that's the spot on definition of squid pro quo, as we used to call it.
I like that.
Now, Danielle Sassoon refused. She wrote a big old long letter saying she would not dismiss the charges because the case was strong and that she was actually about to bring a superseding indictment for tampering with evidence and witnesses, obstruction of justice, right? So she resigned, as did 6 of her colleagues. Then Bove put all the public integrity section lawyers in a room and gave them an hour to choose someone to file the motion to dismiss, or he'd fire them all. So one guy, Ed Sullivan, not from the Ed Sullivan Show, just a different Edward Sullivan, he took one for the team, right? He took the bullet. He's like, all right, I'll do it. I'll file this dumb thing. And he did that to spare the rest of his, public integrity section lawyers from being fired. Of course, 2 weeks later, Donald Trump just gutted the entire public integrity section anyway. So that was kind of all for naught. Mm-hmm. Now, Judge Ho, and I just checked, we still don't have a ruling from Judge Ho. He was skeptical of the motion to dismiss, as we know. So he asked a third party known as an amicus curiae to file a brief to be the opposition here, since the DOJ and Eric Adams are singing off the same sheet of music. And he appointed a guy named Paul Clement, super conservative, longtime Republican guy. Now, Clement turned in his recommendation nearly 2 weeks ago, recommending that Judge Ho dismiss the charges with prejudice, not without prejudice. So you can't bring those charges again. You can't hold it over his head, over Eric Adams' head, like a sword of Damocles to get him to do your dirty work, or you'll indict him again. And so as of this moment, again, still no ruling from Judge Ho, though he did cancel the hearing he had scheduled on this matter that was scheduled for, I think, March 14th. So that might give you a little clue as to he may be taking Clement's recommendation to dismiss this case with prejudice. And the reasoning was Clement was like, why bother? Because if you refuse to dismiss the case, the DOJ is going to sit there and not do anything for 70 days, run out the speedy trial clock, and then they'll be able to file for a dismissal with prejudice anyway. And if Trump pardons him, that's like a dismissal with prejudice. So you're going to end up with a dismissal with prejudice regardless of what you do. So you might as well just do it now. I disagree. I think you should make them go through the motions, but we'll see what Judge Ho decides.
Yeah, the Times says that after Trump won the election, most Democrats were upset, but not Eric Adams, right? He saw an opportunity. The mayor called the president-elect on multiple occasions, congratulating him on his election victory and discussing city affairs. He met at a luxury Manhattan hotel with Stephen Bannon, Trump's ally and his top aide. And then he contacted the president's son, Eric Trump, who runs the Trump family business. Like, What are we doing
Yeah,
here?
we kind of forgot about the whole Trump family business in New York stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the previously unreported extent of the charm campaign was recounted in interviews that the Times did with more than a dozen people with knowledge who spoke anonymously to discuss the nature of their talks. The mayor's case offers a blueprint for fighting criminal charges in this new transactional era. Flatter Trump, forge a personal connection, and when possible, support his agenda. Now, both sides stood to gain. That's what we call a quid pro quo, New York Times. Mr. Adams might have well secured his freedom, while Mr. Trump gained a friend at the City Hall, someone to support elements of his immigration crackdown and potentially his family business, the Trump Organization, which played a role in the mayor's in-person meeting with Donald Trump. For one thing, the meeting was held at a Trump Org property, a golf club in West Palm Beach, Florida. And it came about after Frank Carone, the mayor's trusted outside advisor and former chief of staff, and who's probably was going to be indicted too, contacted Eric Trump, according to two people familiar. The two men became acquainted when Mr. Carone was in City Hall in New York, and the Trump Organization was operating a golf course on city land. The Florida meeting also came as the Trump Organization was bidding on a New York City contract to operate a Central Park skating rink, according to people familiar with the matter. And something that's missing from this, didn't Weisselberg's kid operate that rink for a long time?
I do remember something of that sort.
Right? Like, so now Trump wants his name back on the skating rink. It's just this fucking thing in his craw. Like, I want my skating rink back. Like, the little weird things that he just gets obsessed about.
Yeah. And also in December, Eric Adams' defense team learned of a troubling development. According to court filings, a credible source on December 22nd told Adams' lawyer, Alex Spiro, that a grand jury hearing testimony related to a potential new charge.
All right. So this is December, right, Harry? This is the new
this
charge.
Is in December.
Was Danielle Sassoon, the person who took over at the Southern District of New York. She said, she told us in her resignation letter, as you know, Emile Beauvais, I was getting ready. I had a grand jury going and I was going to bring superseding indictments. Yeah.
And that's why she talked about how strong her case was. Around this time, Mr. Adams appears to have stepped up his outreach to Mr. Trump's circle of supporters. That included turning to Mr. Bannon, a hard right advocate who was hardly a natural touch point for Democratic mayor. Like, what the world? Like, what Democratic mayor is going to Steve Bannon?
A super corrupt one.
Sounds about right. But Mr. Bannon, he also faced charges brought by the Manhattan Federal Prosecutor's Office and had been represented by Mr. Spiro in other matters.
Same lawyer, Bannon and Eric Adams. You could tell a lot about a person by their lawyer.
By the lawyers they keep. Not the company they keep, the lawyers that they keep, right?
They keep, right.
Man, I tell you.
Making attorneys get attorneys.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So again, we're going to keep an eye on the news about what Judge Dale Ho does in this particular case. I still think that he should deny the motion to dismiss, make the DOJ do nothing and run out the speedy trial clock, and then dismiss it on those grounds. That actually is legal. It fits within the law, because you aren't supposed to approve a 48A motion like this. Without, because it's the timing. It's, we want him to do Trump's bidding. He's got to carry out Trump's, orders. I mean, that's not a reason to dismiss. In fact, it's a reason to deny a 48A motion to dismiss.
Yeah.
And so he should do that. He should follow the law. I mean, I understand where Clement is coming from. Like, it's going to end up dismissed without prejudice at the end of the day, so might as well do it now. I don't think so. I think you need to follow the proper procedure.
And that's what you think should happen. Is that you think what's going to happen? I mean, this has been a long time. We've been waiting on Judge Ho's ruling on this for a couple weeks now.
Almost, yeah.
But is this a precedent type case? Is that why you think it's taking so long, or what do you think is going to happen? I
think he's weighing what I just talked about. Like, do I do the right thing, or do I do what eventually is going to be the thing that happens anyway, which has to be the right thing by definition? Do I save the New York taxpayers and the federal taxpayers all the money it would take to continue this thing going on if it's all going to end in a motion to dismiss with prejudice anyway? Or should I, like he's weighing these factors, and he's probably doing it according to the factors in a 48A, in Rule 48A. And I think he'll do, he'll have an explanation for us, regardless of what he decides. It'll be interesting to see what side he comes down on. So
we'll stay tuned, and we will bring y'all the updates as soon as we get them.
As soon as we get them, you might hear a dun 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 breaking news. We have something between, because we record on Monday, we release on Wednesday, and if something happens between now and then, you might hear some breaking news.
Absolutely.
All right, we have a lot more to get to today, including stuff that's happening in the courts and what happens if Trump is found in contempt. Who is going to execute that contempt order? And we have some really interesting information from Democracy Docket. Mark Elias, if you're not a subscriber, you need to subscribe to Democracy Docket. And we'll talk about that after this break, because there seems to be another alternative than the US Marshals, according to the law. So we'll talk about that right after this break. Stick around. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. So there's a lot going on in the courts right now. The courts are one of the last guardrails for democracy we have left. And the question on everyone's mind, including mine, is what happens if Trump defies a court order? So far, it's been about 50-50. Like, he did comply with the Supreme Court order to pay U.S. aid bills. He is complying with reinstatement of probationary employees. It's a little slow going. The Department of Defense is like, but we'd have to make new badges. It's like, if you can't make new badges, how are you going to win a war? What's your warrior ethos, right? Like, use your warrior ethos to make some new badges. So he does appear to be complying, but in other ones, he hasn't. Like, he was found in violation of a temporary restraining order when he was told to unfreeze a lot of federal spending. But there's a big one on the horizon. This is the deportation of immigrants using the Alien Enemies Act. And this was a sneaky piece of work by the Trump administration. On Friday night, Trump decided to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. It's been used 3 times, including when we in the United States used it for internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. And he quietly invoked it. He didn't tell anybody about it. And they started making plans to put 200 to 300 Venezuelans on a plane, saying they were gang members, and they were going to deport them to their buddy down in El Salvador, who's got a big old giant jail that the U.S. gave them a bunch of money that they probably cut corners and pocketed. But, we've got this partnership. So the Judge Boasberg, who's an Obama appointee, was like, no, hearing. We have to have a hearing right now. So, because everybody kind of caught wind, the ACLU sued and said, we have 5 specific Venezuelans that are in trucks right now headed to an airfield in Texas to be deported. And we want an emergency restraining order because they don't fall under the Alien Enemies Act. We're not at war. This isn't an invasion. Immigration is not an invasion. And even if you are in a gang, Trend Agura or whatever it is, the Venezuelan gang, or MS-13, that doesn't fall under the Alien Enemies Act. Just go through the due process of deporting them for committing crimes, and you'll be fine. But they wanted to sneak all these people on a plane in the night. And so Judge Boasberg is like, everybody come in quick. He didn't even have his robes with him. He came in civvies, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, tell me what's going on. Are there planes in the air? What's happening? DOJ's like, we don't know. We don't even know what you're talking about. He's like, great. Okay, you have 45 minutes to figure it out. We'll come back at 6 p.m. And they came back at 6. Then the judge said, okay, well, I'm expanding the class. It's not just the 5 Venezuelans you're suing for. It's going to be anyone that Trump tries to deport under the Alien Enemies Act. And he also said, restraining order put in place. I declare from the bench, you have to stop all deportations. And if there are planes in the air right now, you have to turn them around. And what happened? Those planes did not turn around. And a third one actually took off after the order came in. And they all landed in Honduras and went on to El Salvador and were handed over to the government there, to this massive, almost like a Gitmo, but in El Salvador. So that's what's going on in this. Boasberg, in about an hour from now, about 20 minutes from now, is going to have a hearing. And so that's where we are with this. And so he is in defiance, right?
Yeah, Trump has already defied the judge's order by refusing to recall the planes that were, like you said, were in the air, and another took off prior to the ruling coming down. Well, after the ruling coming down. He's set for a hearing, like you said, in about 20 minutes or so, and we'll be listening on the public line. You all should check that out, too. Everybody has access to that to listen to what's going on in the courts. But if the judge holds the administration in contempt, who can carry out that order, since the US Marshals report to who? Pam Bondi.
Yes. And Democracy Docket has a great guest essay about this from Professor David Knoll, and we want to share it with you. It says, one of the most alarming developments in the second Trump administration is agencies' apparent defiance of court orders, barring them from implementing illegal executive orders. As agencies, including the State Department, have ignored, evaded, or slow-walked judicial decrees, courts have issued increasingly stronger warnings that compliance with their orders is not optional, and litigants have urged them to hold the responsible government officials in contempt of court. Yet, the prospect of holding executive branch officials in contempt threatens a fresh constitutional crisis.
Indeed, it does. Court's power of contempt. The inherent power to compel compliance with orders and punish actions that obstruct the administration of justice is ultimately backstopped by their ability to jail people who defy their orders. There'd be no issue if judges themselves made arrests, but the court's enforcement arm, the US Marshals Services, report both to the court and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. The Marshals' position within the executive branch has led commentators to predict that if courts order the arrest of a defiant executive branch official, the White House or Attorney General Pam Bondi will revoke the order and the courts will run out of options.
Yes, and as Berkeley Law School Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, he argues, the hard truth for those looking to the courts to rein in the Trump administration is that the Constitution gives judges no power to compel compliance with their rulings. It is the executive branch that ultimately enforces judicial orders. But do the courts really lack authority to jail contemners? That's somebody who's in contempt, a contemner. If the marshals go rogue, do the courts really lack the authority? A close look at the court's enforcement powers makes clear that judges do not need to rely solely on the marshals to ensure their orders are enforced.
Interesting. Contempt of court is classified as either civil or criminal, depending on whether a court seeks to compel compliance with its orders or punish obstruction of justice. When it comes to criminal contempt, the executive really does hold a veto over contempt proceedings. While Supreme Court case law and the federal rules of criminal procedure recognize the court's authority to appoint a private attorney to prosecute contempt, the presidents may pardon the contemptor, rendering the prosecution as an academic exercise.
Yeah,
Yikes.
Moot, right?
Yikes.
However, civil contempt is different. The Supreme Court has long held that a pardon cannot stop courts from punishing cases of civil contempt. And while the marshals have traditionally enforced civil contempt orders, the courts do have the power to deputize others to step in if the marshals refuse. This authority is recognized in an obscure provision of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which govern proceedings in federal trial courts. It's Rule 4.1, and it specifies how certain types of process, which is the legal term for orders that command someone to appear in court, are to be served on the party to which they are directed. The rule begins in Section A by instructing that, as a general matter, process must be served by a United States Marshal or Deputy Marshal or by a person specially appointed for that purpose. The next section, Rule 4.1b, is entitled Enforcing Orders Committing for Civil Contempt. It sets some geographical limits for where an order committing a person for civil contempt of a decree or injunction may be served based on the federal versus state nature of the underlying lawsuit, but it does not say who may enforce such an order, and it never modifies the general rule that the process must be served by a marshal, deputy marshal, or a person specially appointed for that purpose. It doesn't overturn that. Thus, by plain terms, Rule 4.1 contemplates that the court may appoint individuals other than the marshals to enforce civil contempt orders.
Does that mean like you and me, AG?
Yeah, they call up Harry Dunn, give him a badge,
that's what it sounds like.
And go arrest Pam Bondi.
Let's do it. This understanding of the court's power is consistent with other provisions of rules that allow them to make use of other parties as a backstop to enforcement by the marshals. For example, the rules governing civil forfeiture provide that when the courts take control of the property, they warrant any supplemental process that may be enforced by marshals and someone specifically appointed by the courts for that purpose. Perhaps, more important, courts' power to appoint individuals other than marshals to enforce civil contempt orders is consistent with the broader law of contempt. A theme in that law is the necessity of courts having independent authority to punish contempts to protect the rule of law. As expressed by the Supreme Court, if a party can make himself a judge of the validity of the orders which have been issued and by his own act of disobedience set them aside, then are the courts impotent? And what the Constitution now fittingly calls the judicial power of the United States would be a mere mockery.
Yeah, that's from the Supreme Court right there. And to be sure, the court that appointed someone other than the marshals to enforce civil contempt would be breaking new ground. This hasn't been done because of the marshals' long and honorable history of respecting their legal obligation to enforce federal court orders. So the courts have rarely, if ever, had to turn to other parties. They've never had to deputize Harry Dunn to go in and make some arrests for civil contempt. If forced to do so, however, individuals from court security officers and probation officers to local police and sheriffs have the training and experience to bring contemners into court. And unlike the marshals, these individuals would be responsible to the court alone, not Pam Bondi. Even a rogue marshal service, in other words, is not insurmountable to the courts enforcing the rule of law. If courts have the courage, the legal tools are there, says David Knoll in Democracy Docket. So everybody got to subscribe to Democracy Docket. They aren't joking around.
I'll tell you what, AG, that gives me a little bit of hope. And, a lot of people are, don't have any faith in the Supreme Court. I don't either. The thing about the Supreme Court, they care about themselves, especially the conservative justices. Well, as we talked about earlier, it isn't really conservative justices anymore. It's more MAGA partisan justices. Right. But they care about themselves, and they don't want to be upstaged either, even if it is by the president. I mean, listen, we could talk about how Alito and Kavanaugh and Roberts,
Gorsuch and
all of them, they don't, they gave Trump all this power, but yet I still believe that they know that they have just as much power as him. So, they refuse to be stomped on. So maybe I don't think Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Roberts are going to go along with with castrating themselves and their power. I don't think they're going to go along with it, particularly in a case like this where he's trying to not only misuse the Alien Enemies Act, but do it before he even was able to determine in the courts that it was a viable option. I mean, that's just getting rid of due process and completely kneecapping the judicial system, the judiciary specifically. Yeah, these justices are supposed to be the wisest translators of the law in this country. So I said supposed to. And I don't think that, like you said, they are going to subject themselves to being stepped over. Yeah,
I mean, they made him a king. I never thought that would happen. I was like, that's just stupid. That's ridiculous.
Correct.
So every time I catch myself saying, "Oh, the Supreme Court will never do that."
Yeah, a king over everybody else. But I'm talking about them. When I think that they are not willing to concede their power either. Like, hey, we'll give you a lot of power, Trump, too. But when it comes down to it, we have just as much, if not more, than you. So I don't feel like you just said, they're going to castrate themselves before him. So we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah. All right, we've got a couple more quick stories, but we have to take one last quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Well, there's no Rudy news today. Rudy. But we have some other quick things to talk about. Charles Chuck Schumer and the 10 Democrats that voted for cloture.
Oh, man. This was so disappointing.
My goodness.
And I got to say, I know there's a lot of folks out there. It's about 70-30 or 60-40, maybe 65-35 in the polls. 65%-ish say we should have shut down the government as opposed to giving Trump and Musk a blank check. The other 35 are like, no, government shutdowns are terrible. Regardless of what you think of a government shutdown, I think that the crux of this problem here is that House Democrats went out on a limb, stuck their necks out. All of them except for Jared Golden. Whatever, fuck him. Mm-hmm. They were pretty much together. Hakeem Jeffries was like, let's do this. Our constituents want this. They want us to hold the line. And Chuck Schumer, with his 9 other folks who voted for cloture so that they didn't use the filibuster. And they've always long been like, we can't nuke the filibuster. We're going to need it one day. This is the day
that you needed it.
And you just rolled over. But again, not so much on the quote unquote merits about whether you disagree about what's worse, a government shutdown or the continuing resolution. We can have debates on that. But what's not debatable is that Chuck Schumer hung his House Democratic colleagues out to dry after they stuck their necks out for their constituents. And it really felt like a gut punch to us.
Yeah,
not me as a Democrat voter, not a Democratic member of the House.
Yeah. Well, no, it felt like them. I saw James Clyburn on this week on the Sunday shows, and he said that they were caught completely off guard by Schumer, especially because Schumer came out 24 hours before and said absolutely not, like that. Right. He was completely against it. Listen, like, yes, shutdowns suck no matter what. I like the approach that Nancy Pelosi took. You know, hey, let's have a clean 4 week. This is our proposal. And a lot of people made the thing about the House. They weren't going to be able to come back. No, the House was in recess. The House did not adjourn. The House knew that there was a possibility that they may have to come back and vote on whatever the Senate gave. So a lot of people are misguided when it comes to, well, the House had already adjourned. No, they could be in recess forever, but they had not adjourned. So they still had to come back to vote if the Senate. And I give Hakeem Jeffries a lot of credit here. Because in a time where it seems like there wasn't any leadership, to have 215 Democrats vote to shut down the government is unheard of. Democrats are usually the ones that are for, keeping the lights on and being the responsible ones. But Hakeem Jeffries
stuck their necks out, man.
They absolutely did. Hakeem Jeffries, I think, gets a lot. Listen, I'll criticize him when he doesn't, but I think that's a hell of a job that he did getting his Democrats on board to vote for something that could be detrimental. But Chuck Schumer, I
wonder how much of that was Nancy Pelosi too. Helping whip votes. But
isn't that what it's about? Isn't that what good leadership is about? Turning to people that know maybe more than you or have dealt with this. Listen, I people call me a leader, but I talk to so many people for guidance, stuff that I don't know about. Hey, what are we doing here? Let's get some help. And I think that approach is what's needed instead of Chuck Schumer basically giving the green light for any other Democrats to vote for it instead of saying, hey, let's stick together. So in all, 10 Democrats go against the 215 in the House and the 47 or 37 now, I guess, in the Senate. It just felt like a gut punch, like you said.
Yeah. And like, I'm with you. Like, I'm not smart. What makes me smart is I read people like Steve Vladeck, right? I go and read his One First Substack, which is basically a free Georgetown law class.
Literally.
These, that you recognize how important it is for other smart people to help make you smart. And, I'm real smart about some things, but, and I try to do my best to help other folks with that. But, the majority of the time I'm always there's always somebody smarter than you in the room. And I think that, smart people recognize that. But it was kind of a gut punch. And so anyway, we'll see what this ends up doing because it sort of has given up the power of the purse for Congress. Yeah. It's sort of written Musk and Trump a blank check. I was personally, again, my opinion is swayed by those who know better than me. All of the federal workers unions, all the federal workers that I spoke to, and I speak to a lot, AOC, Max Frost, the Dems in the House that I really support.
We're against it.
And most of the 35 of the Democratic senators were against it. And so that's where I was like, well, at first I was initially like, I'm against it. But then I was like, well, let me see how other people are feeling.
Yeah.
And I feel like I was on the right side of that. But again, just leaving the Dems in the House out to flap in the wind was bad news.
The Federal Labor Union workers, the workers union, they were against it. They were like, they acknowledged those are the people who are going to be affected by the shutdown. And they said, no, shut it down. And listen, like you said, it's talking to people who know more than you about it. And also outside of just that, Chuck Schumer lost your support. People are calling, indivisible.org voted for him to be removed from speaker.
Yeah, I'm with that.
Not speaker, excuse me,
minority leader. Yeah.
Minority leader. So bad week for Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, he had to cancel his book tour for security reasons, which means he didn't want to get yelled at. So he's canceled that. All right, I have some good news for our final story. Got a couple minutes left.
Yay!
This one comes from Politico. A federal judge has denied the Justice Department's attempt to apply President Trump's blanket pardon for members of the January 6th rioters at the Capitol to one defendant's conviction for possessing illegal guns hundreds of miles away in his Kentucky home. In a ruling on Thursday night, U.S. District Judge Dabney Friedrich, a Trump appointee, became the first judge to reject outright the Justice Department's recently adopted position about the scope of Trump's pardons, his clemency. Reversing its initial stance in the weeks after Trump's inauguration, the Justice Department is now arguing that Trump's pardons extend to crimes with no connection to the attack on the Capitol, other than the fact that law enforcement agents uncovered evidence of them during the January 6th investigation. Friedrich said DOJ's position contradicts the clear and unambiguous language of Trump's day one executive order granting pardons to about 1,500 people convicted of participating in the riot.
Yeah, Friedrich also noted that Trump's order said it applied to individuals convicted of offenses related to the events that occurred at or near the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. The judge found illogical the contention that the order extended to other crimes authorities came across as they conducted that investigation. To interpret the presidential pardon to apply to any type of offense, no matter when or where that offense was committed, simply because evidence of that offense was uncovered incident to a January 6th related search warrant, would defy rationality, Friedrich wrote, quoting an earlier court precedent.
Yep. Goes on to say Trump could clarify or expand his January 6th pardon directive at any time, but he has not. Perhaps because that would draw more attention to the subject and to other crimes committed by, it would be like his perfect January 6th patriots aren't so perfect. It would probably draw a lot of attention to that. Friedrich ordered the defendant, Dan Wilson, whom she absolved of his January 6th charges, to report to prison on his unrelated gun conviction. And Friedrich previously sentenced him to 5 years. In an order Thursday, she also granted Wilson the right to immediately appeal her ruling about the pardon to the D.C. Circuit Court if he wants. And in the weeks after Trump's inauguration day pardon, which erased the convictions of more than 1,000 people who joined the Capitol mob and ordered the Justice Department to dismiss pending cases against hundreds more, prosecutors forcefully rebuffed the defendants who claimed the clemency should appear for their unrelated charges. And Harry, Friedrich was the first judge to express doubt about the Justice Department's new interpretation, that she agreed with the government's initial position that the pardon is limited in scope. A couple of other judges have actually had to go along with this after DOJ.
And make note, like I said, the point is she's a Trump appointee too.
Yeah.
So, and the crazy thing about this whole pardoning thing, especially the Donald Trump's midnight tweet or whatever truth to take away the pardons of us.
Tell everybody about that. Didn't he just say that he wanted to undo Joe Biden's pardons or something?
He said on Truth at midnight in a midnight rant that he was undoing every pardon done by sleepy Joe Biden on the grounds that it was signed by AutoPen. That is the grounds that he's claiming that he's taking away our pardons. And, everybody that I've talked to said, yeah, right, bring it on, dude. We're not scared of you. So it's just him, a lot of bluster and just more Donald Trump. People, when you make statements like that, it's grandstanding saying, hey, this is what I did, but let's blame everybody else. And that's what he's trying to do with taking away our pardons, which has no legal standing. So
yeah, his DOJ is also trying to say Judge Boasberg's order on the Alien Enemies Act doesn't count because oral orders from the bench don't count, and they absolutely do. And his written order came out still before those planes landed. It's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, we'll have a lot. I'm sure we got a lot to talk.
Yeah,
I'm sure we got a lot of stuff to talk about on our bonus episode, which you can everybody will have access to if you become a patron. So we're going to be talking about a lot more of that stuff, and I'm sure there's a week's worth of news that's coming up that we'll be able to talk about then too. So
Yeah. Oh, and this just dropped. The Department of Justice is asking the D.C. Circuit to remove Judge Boasberg from the case.
Unbelievable.
With the Alien Enemies Act. That's probably not going to happen. All right, everybody. Well, like Harry said, we'll see you on the bonus this weekend if you're a patron. If you want to become one, patreon.com/aisle45pod, AISLE45POD. You can use whatever name you want, and we will read it on the air. And you can also participate in our happy hour Q&As on Zoom and any of our live events that are going to be coming up this year. We look forward to seeing you at those as patrons. And we'll be back in your ears Monday. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. And thanks to our patrons for making this show work. And we'll see you next week. I've been Allison Gill.
Harry Dunn. Thanks, y'all.
Cleanup on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.